All right, in this video, I'm going to talk about these conditional statement formats and how they can change around and how that changes the logic of the statement. Okay, so in the if P then Q, this is the P part is the hypothesis, and the Q part is the conclusion. All right, now we can conclusion. All right, yeah, that's good enough. Conclude. No T in conclusion. Okay, so let's go ahead and stick with my original example. Well, let me think of a different one. Hold on a second. Let's expand on triangles here. Okay, so I have an isosceles triangle. And what is an isosceles triangle? Well, it has two congruent sides. Okay, so my statement would be if my P part is a triangle has two congruent sides, comma, and then it is an isosceles triangle. Okay, so that is my conditional statement that includes my hypothesis. If a triangle has two congruent sides, then it is an isosceles triangle. Okay, so let me move on to and change this around. This is the conditional statement, my initial conditional. Okay, then next I'm going to change this around to be a converse of this conditional. So in the converse, you change this around to make it if Q then P. Okay, so here, if I'm going to change this around, my conditional statement, I'm going to just say, hey, if a triangle is an, well, we're going to say if a figure, we'll call this a little bit, if a figure is an isosceles, hard time spelling isosceles, IOSCELE, isosceles triangle, right, then it has two congruent sides. Okay? So there is a converse statement. Okay? Now, is this converse statement true? Well, it depends. You probably want to put a modifier in this. It says exactly two congruent sides, but for all intents and purposes for this, we'll just go ahead and say that this is a true statement. Okay, it could be more specific. I mean, an equilateral triangle has two congruent sides because it has three congruent sides, right? I could put exactly two congruent sides in here, and that would be more precise. Isosceles. There we go. Okay, but the purpose of this video is to have you understand what the difference between all these four different variations. Okay, so next we're going to do an inverse statement. Okay, and an inverse statement is just like just like these, right? But everything is changed to not, right? So if I say, so it's if P, if not P, then not Q. Okay, so and here I'm going to go ahead. So again, this is as compared to my original conditional statement. Now here I'm going to just add a not. I'm going to make this a negative here. Okay, so I'm going to say here, if a triangle does not have two congruent sides, then it is not an isosceles triangle. Okay, I'm doing a little bit of short script here just to save space. Okay, so that is the inverse of the conditional. All I had to do is the P and the Q stays in the same spot, right? The P and the Q stays in the same spot, but it changed into a not statement. Okay, and then finally, this is a contrapositive. So the conditional and the inverse are linked with a not. Okay, and then the converse and the contrapositive are linked with a not. Contrapositive, T-I-V-E, contrapositive. Okay, this is the third type. These are linked with a not. So the conditional state, the inverse is just nots of the P and the Q, and the contrapositive are nots of the Q and the P. So if not Q, then P. So that gets changed around. Okay, maybe I can make a table here, help you remember this stuff. All right, so this example is going to be is if I got to change the then not P, excuse me, this should be then not P. Okay, so I'm changing the P's and the Q spots, right? And the Q, so my Q is if, it's just going to be these, but flopped, okay? So if a figure is not an isosceles triangle, then it does not have two congruent sides. Okay, so that's a contrapositive. It is just the converse of the inverse. It's contrapositive. Okay, so here's a table. Okay, this is going to be the conditional statement. Then we have the converse. And we have the inverse. And we have the contrapositive. Okay, so the converse is, these are all going to be ifs and then. Okay, so the conditional is if P, then Q. Okay. The converse is if Q, then P. Okay, they're just flopped. The ifs and the then statement. Maybe I need one more line. Okay. Now the inverse is not P and not Q. Okay, and then the contrapositive is this flopped. Not, it's like a 2, doesn't it? Not Q and not P. So if you like memorizing tables, this is a good table to memorize to help you remember conditional. This is your original statement, and then your how the P's and Q's flop to go from conditional to converse, how you put not in front of your P's and Q's to make the inverse, and then you put not in front of your Q's and P's of your converse to make the contrapositive. Okay, so hopefully that makes some sense, and we'll get into some examples in class.